Hello everyone and welcome to Kitchen Table Creativity, where we paint together as if we're sitting at the kitchen table. No fancy studio is required. This is for complete beginners to watercolor. So today we're going to paint this beautiful spring image of a butterfly on this purple flower. And I love this because it just feels very spring-like to me, and I love the springtime when there's new growth and we start to see everything come to life. So real quick, I'll tell you what I'm using for my supplies. First of all, I have these 5 colors, and I'm not going to tell you exactly the names of the colors and say that you should use these. I want you to be creative and just use whatever you have on hand, whatever speaks to you. Maybe you want a different color flower, maybe you want one pink, maybe you want the butterfly to look more like a monarch. Whatever appeals to you, just kind of go with that and experiment. And so what I have is, it's very similar to the image. I have a green, which I'm going to use for the leaves. And then this next color is a very dark purple, so I'm going to water that down and then add some layers to make darker colors. I have this gold, and then I have a blue that's similar to the lighter blue in the butterfly, and then a very, very dark blue, which I'm going to use to outline the edges. Okay, so that's the paints, and I have pan paints, so I recommend that you get a spray bottle. You can get these on Amazon or any kind of water spray bottle, and just put pure water. Spray your paints if they're in a pan dry like this, because it primes them and gets them ready to use. And then I have a very inexpensive watercolor paper today. I'm using Canson. It's a 9x12, 140 pound. It is not a pure cotton paper, but it is cold pressed, heavyweight. I just like the way the paint works on this paper, and so I'm really not, you don't have to get anything super special either. And then just have like a scrap piece of the same kind of paper so that you can test your colors on your scrap paper before you put them on your actual work. And so I am going to go ahead and trace this, and I'm going to trace it. I just cut this paper into, I think it's about 5x6 size. You can use the traceable that's in the description, just print it out. And the way that you trace is you just get some graphite paper and you have it the black side down, you put it, you center it, you put this image over it or whatever you want to trace, and then you can either use a stylus like this, or you can use a ballpoint pen or a pencil, and you just trace the basic outlines. I don't trace a lot of detail, and I'll show you that in a minute after I trace it, what it looks like. You just want the basic outlines so that it's centered, so it looks nice, and then you don't have to worry about drawing skills. And this is a really great thing for beginners to do. And then I have my ceramic palette, which I love because I feel like ceramic just works better than plastic, but by all means, if you have plastic, just go ahead and use your plastic. Or you can even use an old dinner plate that's ceramic. People do that too. I always end up gravitating towards these 2 brushes. They're both round tips, and they're pretty small. One is a 5 and one is a 2. The pink one is a 2. So you can see they're very fine tips at the ends, and so they're good for detail work. And I like to work on small projects that are easy to finish. So I have these 2 small pens. And then I also have my finishing pens, which I have a white rollerball pen, and then I have these micron pens, and I use usually a 05 and a 005. The 005 I use is a very small tip to sign my work, and then the 05 I use to do some outlining and highlighting, and then the white one I'll probably use it on the tips of the butterfly. You can see those little dots. I don't know if I'm going to end up doing the spattering on this with the background, and we'll see when I'm done what I feel like. Sometimes I want to do extra stuff like that, but I feel like there's so much detail in this that I might not want to add that spattering. Okay, so I am ready to get started. I'm going to go ahead and trace this and be right back. Okay, so now you can see how I have the basic outlines of this traced, and I didn't add a lot of detail. I'm going to not worry about the detail because I can always go back with a pen or a paintbrush that's very thin and add detail work. Now, the thing about tracing is that you can take any image, any photograph, and do this and trace it so that it's balanced on the page, so that it looks centered. And then you don't have to worry so much about whether you can draw. This is something that I hear over and over with beginner people with art in general, is that they say, but I can't draw. And you don't have to know how to draw to do this watercolor painting, especially the method that I teach, which is very beginner friendly. And so the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take my little bit bigger brush, and I'm going to start, a good rule of thumb is to always start with your lightest colors. And I like to have 3 jars of water on hand just to make sure that my brush is very clean when I switch colors. And so I'm going to start with this gold, and I'm actually going to just water it down a little bit by adding some water, but I want it fairly dark. So I'm going to start with the yellow because it's the lightest color, and I'm just going to do like a light wash in the center of this flower. And I'm just going to leave it very simple like that. Using the same brush, I'm going to move on now to the green. And like I said earlier, I do have these paints already with some water on them so that they're more fluid, a little bit more fluid and ready to use. So the thing about watercolor painting is that if you start out lighter, now this is why it's good to have a scrap of paper, same kind of paper that you're working on, and that looks pretty light. So I like that. I'm going to start painting these leaves in this stem in a lighter color than I really want. And you should also always have some paper towel on hand so that you can blot any extra water if you end up with too much water. I think more than anything, I struggle with having too much water versus not enough water. And when you have too much water, what can happen is that it will start to kind of pool, and that's not even necessarily wrong. Like, a lot of people like that look. I feel like sometimes it just has too much of a harsh edge on it, and so I like to kind of just keep it a little more smooth, I think. So it really requires very little water, and you can see like this is pretty even looking. And I'm just going to go, these are what we call a wash. And if you go outside the lines, totally fine. And sometimes you want to keep it so that it's not like perfectly in the lines, like you had created it as a copy or something of something. You want it to look handmade. You don't want to make it look like it's mass produced. All right, so now I'm going to move on to the purple, and this purple is very dark. This paint set that I'm using is the one made in Japan, and the colors are very vivid and very beautiful. So it only requires a very little bit of paint. It's amazing how little bit of paint you use doing this, doing watercolor and watercolor in general. So now I'm going to go ahead and just start to paint the leaves, and I'm fine with them being very uniform looking at this point, because when I'm done, I'm going to go back and add some extra darker layers to add more depth and more interest. But especially when you're just starting out as a beginner with this, I don't want you to worry about like shadows and making it so that it's very realistic looking. I think the goal should be that we should create things that make us happy. And so whenever I'm looking for ideas for the next project that I'm going to teach and share with you, I really kind of think that first, like, when I look at this, how does it make me feel? Does it make me happy? Does it make me anticipate the next season? Because, I love the seasons. I love the change of seasons. And now that I live here in Idaho, moved here from California, it's a lot different climate. I mean, some days it seems similar, but many days it's just like we get a lot more weather. So I can really tell when the spring's coming. I can tell when the fall's coming. The fall especially, it's just so beautiful because there's a lot of farms still here and there's pumpkins. I had so much fun this last year with my grandkids, and we got amazing pictures and pumpkins. And okay, so you might be able to tell here that when I'm working on this, I'm lifting, like sometimes I get extra paint, extra water, and I can take my brush and just lift that off very easily by blotting it on my paper towel. So I'll kind of show you here. See how I have a little puddle of water there? If I blot my brush, I can either move that around to another area, or I can just remove it completely. And sometimes you have to blot, lift. And that's kind of part of the process. And I have so little paint here on my palette. Let's see if I can show you. I have so little paint here on my palette for this purple. It is so deeply pigmented that it's, I'm trying to get it very light for the first wash. And it's just requiring so little bit, tiny bit. So the best advice I can give is to practice, because everybody has creativity within them. And I mean, there's so many different ways that it appears in our life. And I think just to become aware of how much creativity you really have within you. Because if you've ever arranged flowers in a vase, if you've ever picked out a new outfit, when we go shopping and we look for clothes and, especially for special events, well, a lot of times it takes a lot of creativity to come up with something that you like. So a good practice is to just start to think about, where in my life am I already creative? And then you can start to think of yourself more and more as a true artist, because I really truly believe that everyone has the ability to create art. And, some people are not attracted to doing painting, and that's totally fine. But if you're here and you're watching this, you probably are one of the people who is attracted to it. And so I just want you to know that it's totally doable. All right, so I'm pretty happy with the way that is turning out so far. Now I'm going to move on to that blue. This blue is very interesting. It's called Prussian blue in this set. And again, one of the things that I got really confused about when I started painting is all the different names of the paints. And, there's all these different brands, and then there's all the different names. And you just, I don't know, it doesn't really matter, bottom line, what the name is. And sometimes maybe we do want to create the thing so it looks exactly like somebody else's, but I don't think that's the goal. I don't think that should be the goal. I think it should be, again, like whatever you like. When I first started looking for butterfly and creating butterfly pictures with flowers, I had a monarch. I love monarch butterflies. They're beautiful, but they're also like pretty common. And I didn't really want to use the orange, and so I found this one, and I just love this blue. This blue is very vivid, and I love the way it's working together with the purple and the yellow and the green, because it reminds me a lot of Easter and spring. And so I'm excited to finish this. And the reason why I didn't put it in my sketchbook this week is because I wanted to just have it on this small card, and I might just keep it for myself, or I might give it to someone. But if you paint on just, you cut your paper into smaller sections like this, and then you you just have it as a freestanding card like this, you can always on the back hand write a note, and or you can print out different things and stick them on the back. And I showed that in some of my other videos. I'm not gonna show that today, but I show that in my free workshop that I do once a month. So if you're interested in that, I have a brand new workshop that I'm going to start teaching, which is a bird, and it's really cute, it's really easy, really easy, and it's really fun. And so I have the I'll link in the description if you want to sign up for that. Okay, so again, I like the way this looks. This is the basic wash. And so now I'm going to let this dry fully, and then I'm going to come back and add some more detail work. Okay, so this is pretty dry now, and I'm switching to my smaller brush. This is the number 2. And I'm going to take this now, and with the same colors that I already have on my palette here, I might add a little bit more darker colors, but at least to start out with, I'm just going to go with the ones that I have with this smaller brush. And I'm going to add a few layers. And this yellow is actually very, very light. And so I might add a little orange, but I don't think I will. I kind of want it to be bright. So I'm just going to add a little bit of darker around this area on part of it, so that this part stays a little lighter and this part will be a little darker. Just going to take that paint straight out of the paint palette. Okay, rinse my brush. I have 3 jars of water. The first one is my dirty jar where I put it in there first when it's covered with paint. Then I move on to the second one, and then the third one to make sure it's really clean. All right, let's do the green now. And with this, I'm just going to add some much darker green on these leaves. And since I got it like pretty dark, I'm going to just blend it a little bit with some water to kind of soften the edges a little bit. And I'm going to leave like the edges of these leaves a little bit lighter. And I am going to do the stem. I'm going to paint the stem darker. Now the other thing, I talked a lot about tracing, but you can also, if you don't want to trace, you can just hand draw this. You know, and it's fine however it comes out. It really doesn't have to look just like mine. It can look completely different. And so I would love for you to take pictures of your work and share it with me. Whenever you sign up for my stuff, you'll get my emails, which I only email about once a week, so I don't blast people with emails. In fact, I do a creative journal. I call it the Creative Heart Journal. And I do that, I send that once a week via email. And it's just creative inspiration, totally free. I do it every week. And this painting is in the next, will be in the next issue. It's like a little mini magazine flip book online. All right, so I like the way that turned out. I'm just gonna leave it for now. And you might be wondering, like, all the detail, like the veins and the leaves and stuff. Well, I go back with a black pen, and if you follow me at all and you've seen the kind of paintings that I do, that's why they're so beginner friendly, because it's called watercolor sketching, and you can go in and cover up your pencil lines and add more detail to your work that way. Okay, so now with this darker purple, I'm gonna mainly like add where the leaves are underneath. They would be a little more shielded, I guess, from the sun. So I'm gonna go first and just add that darker purple into those areas. And this should be kind of, I guess, kind of varied, like not exactly all the same everywhere. And that just adds interest and depth. And again, like, I don't want you to worry too much about creating shadows, because that's not that it's so hard. I mean, it's something that you definitely have to work more and study more to make it look really great. So I like to stick with things that are more like more whimsical looking, more cartoonish. Again, they make me not only do they make me happy, they're just way easier, at least for me. And I'm not going to worry too much about the butterfly's body here. I'm going to be filling that in with that very dark blue in a minute. And if you have any areas that you feel like are kind of like harsh edges, you might want to smooth them a little bit with just adding a little bit of water. Now, another thing I want to say, if you're watching this video and you're just thinking, yeah, I want to paint that, but you're not painting, I really encourage you just to just get your paints out and just start, because that's how you're going to learn, and you're going to practice, and just get some paper and some basic supplies that aren't too awfully expensive, and just dive in and experience it. I found that it's just a very relaxing and fun thing to do. And that's why I've always been concerned with women's health in general, because I'm a cancer survivor, breast cancer. And I'm 10 years out. I like to say thriver, not survivor, because I'm thriving. I'm not just surviving. Okay, I'm going to go back and I'm going to add some layers to this butterfly now. This darker, oops, get the purple. Sometimes these colors are so dark, I can't even really see what color they are. Actually, it might be a good idea to add a little bit of the purple to that blue. And I'm just going to add some to the butterfly so there's a little bit of more interest, like I did with the flower. And here I'm just putting some plain water to kind of spread this paint around a little bit. And blot, make sure to blot so you don't get too much water. That's why good to have some extra paper towels. I always put paper towels underneath where I'm working, and then I can just easily blot on that. Or sometimes I have it in my hand, especially if I'm working with like acrylics or different kinds of paint. I like to have that blotting tissue on hand, and I found actually paper towel works better than tissue. And see how it's like kind of nice to leave some areas so that they're lighter. Just adds interest. Okay. All right. So that I'm going to leave the layers as they are now, and then I'm going to go back in when this is totally dry, and I'm going to add that very dark blue to the butterfly. And we will then move on to the final finishing touches. So we're more than halfway done. Okay, now it's good to wait to make sure that your painting is dry when you're moving on to the different steps. So now I'm going to take this very, very dark bluish gray, and I'm just going to test it on my paper again and see. It's very dark, and that's exactly what I want. I want it to look almost black, but I decided I didn't really want black. I wanted it to be dark blue, so it's not quite as stark. So I'm going to move this palette out of the way now, because this is very deep, fine detail work. Small brush again, and I'm just going to start with the body here. And a good rule of thumb when you're doing this kind of detail stuff is to just do a very, very light touch and kind of pretend like the brush is part of your hand or your fingers. And I'm just going to do the body of the butterfly first. And I know I need a little bit more water here. Don't want too much, but I also need enough to make it so that it moves. Now, don't worry too much about this being so totally perfect again, because just keep in mind, especially when you're painting things that are in nature, that nature is not perfect. You know, whether it's a flower or an animal or anything, it's not going to be absolutely perfect. And a good thing to do with this is just breathe. As you're painting like fine detail work, if you're painting things that are, you're afraid you might go out of the lines or goof it up somehow, just breathe. Tell yourself it's going to be fine. I don't know, I notice a lot of times, like I play pickleball, and when I play pickleball, I find a lot of times when I'm playing like a tough point, I'm actually holding my breath, which is, I don't think that's really healthy. And so I try to breathe a lot, like, you know, while I'm playing and in between the points. Okay. Now keep in mind too, we are going to go back and we're going to be adding like some white detail to this. So sometimes when I'm in the middle of a painting, I'll look at it and go, well, this isn't really turning out the way I thought. But, you know, a lot of times it's just because it's not done yet. And you will be amazed at the difference. Especially when you're just starting and you're just doing the first wash. It's easy to think like, oh, it's not coming out. But then you'll be really surprised when you're done. And I'm going to use the black pen to add the detail to the rest of the butterfly and his antennas and his legs and all of that, because I don't want to try to do that with my paintbrush. Okay, so again, now we'll go ahead and let this dry, and then I'll move on to the next step. Now, I just went back and added a few little like wavy lines here with that dark color, because as I'm looking at the butterfly in my original, he has, I mean, they show a little bit wavy, just to know that I did that before I had the camera on. So you could go back and add that if you'd like. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this fine tip 0.5 micron permanent ink pen. Make sure that you use permanent ink when you do this kind of work, because you don't want it to smear. It's really important to use permanent. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start with the leaves, and I'm just going to kind of very lightly, don't press hard, and just kind of pretend like I'm drawing this. And this is called watercolor sketching, and this is why it's so forgiving for beginners, because not only does it cover the pencil if you've traced it or drawn it, but I just love the look. It makes me think like I drew this with pen and ink, and then I went back and painted it. And you can add detail like this, like these veins in the leaves. Again, you don't want them to be like perfectly uniform, because nature is not perfectly uniform. And where this is going to be really handy is the flower, because I can now go ahead and just really add some interest with this flower, all the different petals. Add some detail around the center. And then where the center of this flower is, I'm just going to kind of add dots. I'm not going to do like a heavy line here. And I'm just going to add a few more dots. So you can see how much more it's becoming defined just by outlining these areas. And I think I'm going to add just a few more lines on these petals. Okay, so now the butterfly, like I said before, we could go ahead and add his antennas. Define his body a little more. And add a few legs. And then what's really going to make a difference is adding the detail on his wings. And it's easier, I think, if you rotate your paper a little bit too while you're working on it. That's another reason why I kind of like to do free paper that's not in a book. It just feels a little bit easier to me. Okay. All right, so then the last step here will be to add the white details. And so I'm going to do that next. Okay, so now that this is nice and dry, I mean, you want to make sure it's really, really dry. Again, especially with the white. I went ahead and added a few more darker shades of blue to the inner part and the outer part of his wings. And again, you can do that if you want. If not, totally fine. You know, another thing is that if you don't want to do the black outlining, you can always erase the pencil too with an eraser and go back in and do that. Now I'm going to use this white roller ball, uniball, and especially with this, it's very important that your other work, your paint is dry or it will smear. And I'm just going to test it on this paper, which it seems like it's fine. And so I'm just going to go in now and add some white dots to his wings, because these actually look really heavy right now because they're so dark. Now, if you don't have a white pen, you can always use some white paint. I've just found it's easier to use the pen because, first of all, it's harder to make little tiny dots with white, but a lot of times it doesn't cover really well. And even with this, I might go back and add some more detail with the white again, because once it dries, it might not cover as well. And then I think I'm just going to add like a little bit of white to his body here. Again, you don't want them to be like super, super uniform. And I think one last thing that I'm going to do while that's drying is I'm going to go back to my very dark purple, and I'm going to actually add some much darker purple to the flower, because I feel like what's happening is the butterfly is kind of overwhelming because it's so dark. And so I'm going to balance that out a little bit with some purple. Okay, I'm going to get this very dark. And I'm going to go into the center mainly of this flower. And so this is just to show you too, like if things go a little bit differently than you had planned, a lot of times just take a step back and have a look at it, and maybe there's something that feels off or that you'd like to change. And of course, it's totally fine to do that. And it's also fine to just repeat and do it over if you want. But I don't know. I think for me, I don't do a lot of things over again. I like to just keep moving forward, and sometimes I do duplicates, for different reasons. Yeah, and I like the way that this is looking because I feel like it's balancing the darkness of the butterfly a little more, to have a little bit darker purple on this flower. And this is another reason why you definitely want to use permanent black ink. And I've actually ordered several different kinds of pens, and the white rollerball I found works the best. But the black pens, sometimes they say they're permanent and then they still kind of smear a little bit. So I really like those micron pens. I know there's another brand which I can't remember off the top of my head. Okay, I like that a lot better. And you know what? I'm actually going to add some more green, to the darker green, to the leaves too, just to kind of add some depth to the bottom. A good rule of thumb with any kind of artistic composition is darker at the bottom, because when it's at the bottom, it gives the impression of weight, something being weighted down. And I think these colors still look very spring-like. Okay. All right, I am very happy with the way this turned out now, and I hope that you're happy with how yours turned out. And I always say that you should sign your work. Almost always I end up signing my work in the lower right-hand side. Before I do that, I am going to take this white roller ball and just touch up to some of these areas ever so slightly. Okay. And the way that I like to sign mine is just with my initials. and I usually just put it in the right-hand corner. And I use the smaller pen, the 005, and I just make it very light, very, very light. Like I'm barely pressing. I put my initials, and I put the year 2026. And that way I can always look back and see my work and how it's progressed and how it's coming along. And so there you go. There is your finished project. You know, I also have a Facebook group that is all women, and I would absolutely love if you join my Facebook group. There's a link in the description. It's totally free, and I have more stuff that I share in there, more projects, more information about painting and creativity in general. And so join my Facebook group and go ahead and upload your paintings that you're finishing, and I would absolutely love, love, love to see that. Thank you so much for painting with me today. Have a great, great rest of your day or evening, and I hope to see you in the next tutorial. Bye now.